Hello, I'm Catherine Clark, and welcome to a special Remembrance Day edition of Beyond Politics. Over the past several weeks, I have had the privilege and the honor to interview 4 veterans who have served in either the Second World War, the Korean War, or in Afghanistan. And now my interview with Major Ray Wisk, a soldier and an emergency room doctor who served our country, saving lives on the front lines in Afghanistan. Major Ray Wisk, welcome to Beyond Politics. It's really great to have you here.
Thank you for listening to our stories.
You are the author of 2 books which detail your time in Afghanistan. But I wanted to paint a picture for our viewers of where the soldier started, where the doctor started. I mean, how did the two come together? Were you a soldier first? Were you a doctor first?
I was a soldier first. When I was much younger, in my late teens and early 20s, I was actually an officer in the Canadian infantry. I got out after that to pursue my educational career. And you never really leave the Army. You know, once you're a soldier, you probably stay a soldier the rest of your life. And so when the Afghan mission started, by now I'd been a doctor for a decade or more, I followed it very closely, very interested in what was going on. And the more I read and the more I found out about it, the more I came to believe that the Afghan mission was an example of a very rare thing, a moral war. And I decided I just had to do my part in it. I approached the Canadian forces, re-enlisted, and was deployed to Afghanistan.
It is one thing to make a decision for you yourself to proceed and do this, but an entirely different thing for your family to be able to accept it. How did they accept it? Or did they ever accept it?
I don't think the answer to that one is either easy, short, or yet completely known. When a soldier goes to war, his whole family goes with him and pays as high, if not a higher price than the soldier does, assuming the soldier comes back alive. My wife went through a range of emotions, from first support to fear, to anger, to really angry, to acceptance, and then finally to pride in what I'd achieved, especially towards the end of my first tour when it became known that I'd set the record for longest time in combat by a doctor. My daughter, now oldest daughter, paid a very heavy price and has struggled with the effects of that and continues to. And I am still left to hope that one day she will recognize the value of what I did and accept the price that she had to pay for it. But I would tell you that the jury is still out on that one.
Not to prolong the discussion about that too much, but does your daughter, when you talk about you're still not entirely sure, is it a fear of when you leave? Is that how it... Because I'm sure that that's a similar situation for a lot of soldiers and their families.
Very much. Very much. My daughter was 2 1/4 when I left the first time. She just turned 4 and I left the second time. She was angry for quite a while. I would tell her I love her every day. She didn't say it back for about 3 years after I came back from my second tour. And to this day shows the effects of that absence, shows the effects in being worried about whether I will ever go away again, what will happen. And I try every day to repair that, but I'm conscious of it all the time.
When you left, you had an interminable trip to get there the first time. Yeah. Like you describe in FOB DOC, it was basically planes, trains, and automobiles with a bunch of delays thrown in. You talked about the flight into Kandahar airfield, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, but you said you were packed so tight that, I mean, there was nowhere to go. You were just packed right in. So when you finally arrived and you've had this insane travel, what was your first impression when you walked off the plane?
Walking off the plane the first time.
Just relief?
Yeah, honestly, I think that's probably the best word. Just, okay, done. We're here. But there is that moment, where you realize I'm in a war zone now. The training is over. The practice is over. It's for real now. The next time I hear a siren go off, it's because there's an incoming rocket that can destroy an area the size of my house. If I'm anywhere near it when it hits, they'll be sending me home in a baggie. And then that siren goes off a few hours later, and your mouth goes dry from terror. Coming off the plane, there is that immediate relief of just walking around finally, but right after that is the realization that this is now for real, and it's a very, very sobering moment.
For some people, that would be a welcome moment, the training is done and I'm here. Mm-hmm. And for other people, there must be a sense of, okay, I'm not entirely sure that I knew what I was signing up for. Mm-hmm. Did you know what you were signing up for?
Well, I had an advantage. This was not my first war. I'd been in 2 war zones previously with Doctors Without Borders, and so had experience being in combat, being shot at, not shooting back, but I knew what it was like to have bullets whizzing by my head. So I knew exactly what I was getting into. Having said that, if anything, that made me even more frightened when I got there, precisely because I knew what I was getting into. But I had a clear idea of what I'd signed up for.
Did they put you to work right away?
Pretty much. The very first day I was in the trauma center at the Kandahar airfield. But then the Army seemed to remember that, and it hadn't been brought up before that, especially as an emergency specialist, I had been slated to just run the trauma center at the main base at Kandahar. But as I said, a couple of days after I got there, they seemed to remember about my infantry training, my combat training, and there had been a spot that had opened up as not a doctor, but a senior combat medic out in the combat area with the battle group. And they asked me if I'd be willing to go out and serve in the combat area. And I said, well, that's where you need me to be. I came here to serve. And so I went out. It was supposed to be for 1 month. And after that first month, they said, well, could you just stay out there and not come back? And I ended up spending my first tour there. And for my second tour, they sent me directly out there. It wasn't a surprise the second time. The second time I was slated to go out into combat 6 months before I went.
So when you talk about going out as a combat medic, what does that mean? I mean, what was your specific job? Were you actually in combat?
Yeah. So of the 3,000 Canadians we deployed to Afghanistan at any one time, about 2,000 of them stayed at the Kandahar airfield, the main coalition base in southern Afghanistan, in a support role, so medical, logistics, technical, etc., intelligence. 1,000 were the battle group, the people who actually went and chased the Taliban on the ground and fought them, with grenades and rifles and bayonets. And so as a senior combat medic, those are the people I accompanied, and we would fight from our forward operating bases, or FOBs. And so that's where I was based, with anywhere from 100 to 200 Canadians and a similar number of Afghan soldiers, because remember, we were there helping the Afghan government fight the Taliban, and we were training them. And we would fight together to go fight the Taliban. So that was my role, was to assist that group.
When you arrived at the FOB, you were at FOB Leopard, Lynx?
Now at the time we called it FOB Lynx in the first book because of security concerns. I can now tell you that was Forward Operating Base Spurwin Gar.
Okay. Yeah. So what was it like? I mean, even compared to Kandahar Airfield, like even compared to what you had when you first arrived in Afghanistan, what was it like?
I suppose the term rustic would apply. It was pretty minimal living conditions. You're in a bunker, obviously underground because of rocket attacks. You're sleeping on a...
Well, you're in a bunker.
You're sleeping in a camp cot. And rustic dirt floor. It's... that first tour was pretty minimalist kind of living in conditions. By the second tour, things had gotten considerably better. Yeah. We were in above ground bunkers now, wood floor, even had a fridge. So things...
So
pretty primo.
If you didn't have a fridge
the
first time
around,
you were literally on a cot.
Yeah,
just a cot.
Yeah, just a cot.
And if you were just on a cot, what was your medical situation like? I mean, what did the room look like?
So
especially compared to what you were coming from here.
Sure. So the unit medical station was a 2-cot arrangement and just had stuff along one wall. That again didn't look like it was that much, but with the medical eye, if you looked at it, you saw that I had everything I needed for that first half hour of trauma care. I could get people breathing, put a tube into their lungs if they weren't breathing. I could do CPR. I could start IVs. I could open up chests if the lung had collapsed from too much bleeding. I could even puncture the heart, the lining of the heart, if there was bleeding around the heart. So I could resuscitate people. And that's really all I was expected to do, because within a half hour, and certainly never more than an hour, I could count on a helicopter evacuation. That was actually a hard line, is that if helicopter evacuation was going to be more than an hour away, either because of weather or equipment considerations, there weren't enough aircraft around, we would stand down from combat operations. Our promise to our wounded was, we will have you in an operating room within 60 minutes. And that's hugely important, because if you can do that to a trauma victim, you stand a very good chance of keeping them alive. In modern war, if you're not disintegrated and killed instantly by the explosion, the most likely way you're going to die is from bleeding to death. And I can stop it if it's on the outside, but I can't stop it if it's in the chest and the abdomen. That needs a surgeon, an operation, an operating room. And if you can get the patient within an hour to that operating room, you stand a very good chance of keeping them alive. The survival rate for people wounded in World War II, is in the 50-60% range. In Vietnam, it's in the 80s. Our survival rate at Kandahar, if you got to the Kandahar airfield, the main base and where the surgical operating rooms were, and you still had a pulse, it was 99%. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying you didn't get amputations and severe after effects, but you got to go home to your family.
It must have been really incredible and really stressful to deal with having to deliver that kind of medical care in a constrained amount of time, because you also you operated on when the helicopters arrived to evacuate them as well, right? You had a time frame.
Very much, and that was something, the first time it happened, that caught me completely by surprise, and I realized I have to find all the life-threatening injuries in all three of these patients, as it happened to 3 Canadians hit by an improvised explosive device. And I realized the chopper was about 20 minutes out, as I'd been told, and I thought, if I miss a life-threatening injury, something that's going to kill these guys, it will kill them on the way in, because they're not going to get treatment in the back of a noisy moving chopper. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. And I remember after I stabilized them all, got them all in the helicopter, I was almost vibrating. I was shaking so hard. But yeah, that is something that civilians are unaccustomed to, is working that fast and making sure you don't miss anything, because there is that gap between your treatment and the operating room where they get what you gave them and nothing else. So.
Were you treating similar kinds of injuries? I mean, was there a specific kind of injury that's typical to a combat zone that you were treating regularly? Or were you getting pretty much, you had no idea what was coming in each time?
Well, you have no idea. I mean, it's pure emergency medicine. You have no idea what's going to come in, but it does follow one of two patterns, right? Either it's a hole, because the guy got shot, so there's one hole, possibly two, where the bullet came out, or something's torn, something's ripped up from an explosion. So within the context that it's one of those two things, yeah, it can be just about anything.
One of the interesting things I found, too, was that you treated the Taliban.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but a lot of people would wonder about that.
Yeah.
But you've been really firm that that was the right thing to do.
Oh, absolutely. It's the right thing to do on so many levels. I mean, first, it's the right thing to do. You don't mistreat prisoners of any kind, especially wounded. I mean, these people are completely vulnerable. They're non-combatants at this point. So you take as good care of them as you do of your own soldiers. That is the basis of a moral war, right? I mean, our whole point is we're fighting bad guys. If we're going to do that, we're going to make that claim. We can't be bad guys ourselves. But beyond that, it's smart warfare, especially in a war like this, in a moral war, because our enemies are saying horrible things about us. They're saying we're bad guys to their soldiers. And they're using that construct to do the kinds of things that they do to their prisoners, which are pretty awful. And it's not true that the Taliban don't take prisoners. What's true is that the Taliban don't let prisoners live. They torture them to death within 12 to 24 hours using methods that are practically medieval. And their soldiers think that we're going to do the same thing to them. And so when they get captured, especially when they're wounded, and they get good medical care, they get their pain taken care of, they get their lives saved, it has an impact. And I made a point every time that happened of telling these wounded Taliban, we're Canadians, and we did right by you. You remember that. And that led to a lot of these guys flipping. You know, they're in the hospital, they start talking to our intelligence people and saying, you know, I think I got sold a bill of goods here. You guys are not the people I was told you would be. And we've gotten actionable intelligence from that. By actionable, I mean intelligence that has led to high-level Taliban kills. where we've gone out and been able to find some of their leaders and take them out. So it's the right thing to do. It's also the smart thing to do.
Were you conflicted, though, when you treated them?
Not at all. Not at all. The fact that he was just trying to kill me and now I'm taking care of him, no, he's a wounded individual. At that point, you do what's right. There's absolutely no conflict at that point. Again, it's the right thing to do and it's smart.
Isn't it true that they would often leave their wounded out on the roads where they knew Canadians would be?
Yeah, they absolutely
by?
would. We would intercept their communications and we'd hear things along the lines of, well, Mohammed's hit really bad and I don't think she's going to make it. And the other Taliban commander would say, oh, no, the Canadians just left our area. They're going by your area. Drag him into the road. The Canadians will take good care of him. By the time my second tour came around, that happened not infrequently. And you'd find this guy. I remember one guy we picked up, and he said, "Yeah, I was just hit by some crossfire in the battle yesterday." And he's wearing his clothing. And oh yeah, no, I just got myself here. Please help me. I just got hit. What's this IV doing in your arm?
Really?
He still had the IV tube, the little capped-off IV tube in your arm. And he says, "What do you mean? You said you didn't get any treatment. What's this?" Oh, yeah. Well,
sorry, I forgot to take it out.
I forgot to mention that. So yeah, no, we knew who these guys were.
What about the kids and families who were there too, though? Because I have to imagine that your mandate was to take care of your soldiers and the Afghan soldiers and people who had been directly affected by combat. But what about kids who might need care in a nearby area, or a parent who'd been, hurt in a regular accident?
Sure.
Were you able to care for them?
Well, since it's now 5 years after the fact, I can probably talk about this now. There is a hard rule, right, in Afghanistan. We're there to look after wounded warriors. That's our role. That's what we have to be available for. So the entire Afghan civilian population, except if they've been wounded by the war, have to be directed to the Afghan medical service, which, as you can imagine, even compared to what we had on the FOB, is pretty minimal. Not all that competent. And there's a bunch of good reasons for that. Yes, we have to save our resources for our wounded warriors, but also if we start treating the locals, then we're going to undercut the local medical system, and that'll lead to resentment on part of local doctors, local pharmacists, etc., and it's going to prevent their system from developing. So bad all around. Having said that, you don't shed your morality just because you put on a uniform. So you're walking on a patrol and you see some kid with a bad burn or somebody's got a broken bone. We bent that rule about as far as we could. Even on occasion, I even took people right onto the FOB, really breaking all the rules here, bringing unknown civilians into the FOB and doing small and sometimes not so small operations on them. There was one Afghan who'd been stabbed by a neighbor who, his evacuation was refused because it wasn't a war wound. And, basically his guts were hanging out. And he was going to die within 24 hours. And now I'm not a surgeon, but, with having a surgeon back at Kandahar talk me through it, he said, oh, go for it. You know what to do. You've been in enough of these operations. So I went for it. And fortunately, he did extremely well. I actually visited him on my second tour. He's got a big honking scar there, but he's still walking around with all his guts inside him. But yeah, we would break that rule fairly often to help out where we could. But, you had to be judicious in when you did it.
Can you tell me about your interactions with the Afghan people? What were they like?
Afghanistan's been at war for 30 years. They've seen soldiers of various stripes come and go. The Afghan army, the Russians, the Taliban, us. And they find themselves perpetually being tossed, pushed from side to side by these forces. And so they've learned to be very, very careful in how they interact. Having said that, they make political statements all the time. You go on patrol in deep Taliban country, and there's a picture in my second book where I actually get this clump of grapes from a passing farmer. That's a huge political statement, because if the Taliban see him doing that, they will kill him for extending a small kindness to a coalition soldier. So you would see that on a regular basis. And you would see that these expressions like this of the locals being happy you were here. People have sometimes told me that, they feel that we shouldn't be in Afghanistan, we shouldn't have gone because the Afghan population itself should have gotten rid of the Taliban. If that's really what they wanted, they should have done it themselves. To which I say, if you have thousands of people with guns and 1 million farmers with no guns, it's not a question of what the farmers want. It's a question of what the people with the guns want. And the best proof of that is what happened in the educational system after we kicked the Taliban out. Before we invade, there's 600,000 students in all of Afghanistan, no girls. After we invade, about 10 years later, by 2011, there are 9 million students in school, of whom 3 million are girls, who keep going to school despite the Taliban killing some of them, killing their parents, killing their teachers, throwing acid in their faces. They keep going. There is no better proof that that is what Afghan parents, including fathers, wanted for their children. They kept going to school. That's what they wanted. But the only way to give them that was to get rid of the people with the guns who wanted to stop it.
When you left after your first tour, was it a difficult readjustment going from seeing these people who were really desperate to be able to send their kids to school and to do so safely, and where you're working in very, maybe primitive, it's too strong a word, but not no, conditions. And then you come home back to a world where everything is available. Was that a difficult adjustment?
Again, my previous experiences working in the developing world, working medically in the developing world, probably prepared me for that. I had a much tougher time after the Nicaraguan War. My first mission, being in a combat zone, working medically, that took me months to adjust when I came back. But with that experience, upside of age is maturity and experience. Not entirely a bad thing.
Was it easy to get used to living in a combat zone, to hearing? Because you've talked in some in your books about, you're lying in your bed and you can't sleep because all you hear are, you hear rocket fire, you hear.
Well, I remember that passage in my second book quite well. That was outgoing fire that was keeping me out because it was just so freaking loud. These things are, even when you're shooting at people, the bombs that you throw at them make a heck of a lot of noise leaving. And I remember it being impossible to sleep while that was going on. But what you do get used to, is the fact that they'll take pot shots at you in the night. And if it's just a couple of rounds, boy, you'll barely roll over in your sleep. It's amazing what you can get used to. It's fascinating. It was fascinating to me that you could be terrified and bored at the same time, and because that's what life is in a combat zone. It's mostly boring. That's what a lot of people don't understand, because the concept of most civilians of combat is based on Hollywood movies, and Hollywood movies are combat pretty much all the time. The reality of combat is that 95% of the time there's nothing going on. Nothing. You're just planning. The people above you are planning, organizing stuff, getting ready to go and do something. But until that something actually happens, it's dead calm. I wrote 2 books while I was in Afghanistan. It's not like I didn't have spare time. There was a lot of dead time. And so, there is a lot of boredom. And the fact that every now and then somebody shoots at you does not make it any less boring unless the shooting really gets intense.
Did it diminish the fear, though?
No, not at all. When the shooting now becomes intense, when it's not just a couple of pot shots, when the bullets are going by your head and you're trying to figure out where they are so you can kill them, that is the most intense and worst moments of your life.
Is it true that you used to keep a bullet in your pocket for yourself?
I kept 2, one for my pistol, one for my rifle, because I had seen the bodies of Taliban prisoners, or what was left of them. And if by some incredible stroke of bad luck I was cut off from my combat team and I was running out of ammunition, it looked like I was going to get captured by the Taliban. There's no way I was ending my days like that. I wanted a quick, painless exit, and I was going to give myself one.
Given all that you've been through and having to, make decisions to leave your family and carry 2 bullets in your pocket, is it still something that you can look back on and say, I'm really glad that I did that. That was important to me. Very much so.
Very much so. I will never look back on my time with regret, no matter what happens. I will regret the effect it's had on my daughter. I will be sad about that for the rest of my life. I will regret the mistakes that we made, because inevitably we did right there. We had accidents where civilians died by our hand, and I write about them in my books, and I mourn their deaths every day. But will I regret the mission? Never. What was going on there was horrible. It was one of those, gee, somebody should do something about that. And we did. And we tried. And I think what we had was the opening salvo of a struggle that'll probably last a couple of generations. I wish that wasn't true, but I truly believe that it is. I think we're engaged in the same struggle, or rather in a struggle of the same magnitude as the one that confronted Soviet communism. You know, that lasted 50 years before we finally put that thing into the dustbin of history. And I think this is going to last just as long.
As a final question, we're doing this for Remembrance Day. We're talking about this because of Remembrance Day, and we tend to think of Remembrance Day, at least those of us who are not in the military, as being a way to remember past wars. And when we say past, really past. Mm-hmm. Why, as a modern soldier, is it important for you to have Canadians understand the importance of Remembrance Day for all soldiers?
Yeah, it's important because if you want to remember, you have to know what's going on right now. And the most important thing Canadians need to do is be informed of what's going on in the world. I have no problem with the individual who opposes what we did in Afghanistan. I'm happy to debate that person. I will respect him. I will cherish him. Because partly I fought to defend the idea that you get to disagree with me in a peaceful way and respect my point of view. I'll respect yours. That is something I deeply, deeply believe in. But what I can't stand is the person who says, Afghanistan, oh, was that a peacekeeping mission? No, 158 of my brothers and sisters in arms died in combat fighting. You need to know that. I get asked during my time, I would regularly get asked by Canadians, hey, I heard you were in Iraq. No, that was another war, and we weren't in that one. That is painful and hurtful to veterans. So Canadians need to get informed so that they know what's going on in the world. Because the most important decision any country can make is to go to war. Because, we are the ones who get to do that. We are the ones who die on your behalf, and just as significantly, we're the ones who kill in your name. We carry the scars of these events on our bodies and on our souls for the rest of our lives. And so Canadians owe it to us to be well informed so that they can be active participants in the debate about whether or not we're going to do that.
Thank you. Thank you for your service, and thank you for taking the time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to our stories.